Okay, well, hello everyone. Welcome to another edition of One Plus One, your place for inconvenient truth-telling and myth-busting. We are rejoined by Aidan Jonah, the editor-in-chief, the founding editor-in-chief of the Canada Files, and audiences. If you are a fan of One Plus One, and if you and especially those part of the Canadian peace movement and the anti-imperialist movement. We're doing this special interview because Aidan is continuing to do his fundraising drive for the Canada Files, and people really, if you can, please donate to that fundraising drive. Donate generously to that fundraising drive, and that's the reason why we have Aidan back on the program, because the Canada Files has been putting out lots of interesting content, and we're going to discuss one of those articles. So first, Aidan, thanks for coming back on the program.
Yeah, no, it's my pleasure. I always enjoy coming on.
Likewise, and folks, well, I'm going to post this in the links at the end of the show. But Aidan was on Lee Camp's Redacted Tonight, not too long ago. So
and Daniel Dumbrill too.
Exactly.
And did you mention? I'm not sure if you know this, but I also I've kind of starting to become a bit of a semi-occasional commentator on Press TV. So I've appeared twice on there. Yeah, proper TV network.
Yeah. Fantastic. I didn't actually. I did see that link. I didn't get a chance to check it out, but it's fantastic that It's fantastic that these these people with a huge platform like Danny Dumbrell, Lee Camp, and Press TV are saying, hey, Aidan, come on the program and discuss Canada's role in the world, because I think more and more the silence about Canada needs to be the silence regarding Canada's role in the world needs to be spoken out, and I think more and more people are people are starting to realize that Canada is not force for good in the world. Although my only problem is many people think that evil started under Stephen Harper and not like the entire history of Canada. But anywho, but yeah. Anyway.
Oh yeah, no, for sure. And I mean, it's interesting with Press TV. It's a cool opportunity. It's a different opportunity because I've been invited so far to talk about certain things around American politics, which is an interesting sphere for me. I mean, it's something obviously you're in North America, you can't help but have a close eye on American politics. But it's fascinating. It's a new experience. So I enjoy it for sure. I mean, would I enjoy talking about some Canadian stuff too? Yeah, sure. But I mean, hey, if a network like that wants to hear my thoughts or my commentary on the issues, I mean, I enjoy it and it helps them out. So I'm always happy to do it. So.
And to give a bit of a self-congratulatory plug, this is why I do One Plus One. because I look at a lot of the same programs that that you look at, and sometimes I feel as if like, okay, that's interesting, but what about France's real role in the world? What about the EU's nefarious role in the world? Germany's nefarious role in the world? Canada's role in the world? And that's why when I launched my program, I said to myself, okay, let's try to seek out voices who are critical of Canada's Canada's plutocracy as well as Canada's imperialism, which is why it's great to have you come on the program, Eve Angler, Dimitri Lascaris, and Jay Watts and so many other Canadian dissidents. So anywho, so let's all right. So Aidan, before we run out of time, let's get into your latest article. And of course, folks, this is for Aidan's fundraising drive, so do donate generously to the Canada Files fundraising.
It's DonorBox. It's donorbox.com/the-Canada-Files.
Perfect. And so, Aidan, let's talk about this latest article of yours called "Influential Canadian Social Democrats Attempt to Manipulate Palestine Solidarity for Imperial Aims Against China." And explain what your findings were, and then we'll have a mini discussion about it, because it's a brilliant article and you brought up a lot of really good points in your article, and so Floor is yours.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, this one was a very interesting sort of piece. It kind of came along. It was something that happened in like a period of like 10 days, pulled it together basically. But it was something that kind of was inevitably bound to happen because I was just starting to slowly see these things kind of come up. And it was really fascinating for me because I mean, I actually have the Electronic Intifada to kind of thank in terms of their podcasts for giving me a mind that somebody might try to do something like this. In particular, because they had Rania Khalek and Max Blumenthal on. And so
Rania,
obviously,
who's been a guest on this program, fantastic journalist, media critic, and NGO critic. Yeah.
oh yeah, no, for sure. And so the thing that really interested me, because they came on separately, is they both really hit on how the Palestine solidarity movement in America actually has been used to support the dirty wars on Syria and the destruction of Libya, right? And so it's really fascinating because what they do in a cynical way is they take a legitimate oppression, right, that Palestinians face from Israel, and then they actually compare it farcically to dissident or Western-backed extremists or dissident movements that, quite frankly, are not legitimately oppressed. And there's just, quite frankly, not a proper case to compare the two, because it's to a certain degree, it's straight up insulting to compare the plight that the Palestinians face to the treatment of Uyghur Muslims in China. And you look at the overall prosperity that you have in China. I mean, it doesn't just magically skip over Xinjiang because there's some sort of secret quote unquote CCP plot. That isn't how it works. Mm-hmm. Even though if you look at the deranged minds of rad libs on social media, which is always an interesting place, you'd believe that. But yeah, I mentioned that because essentially, right, with this case, of course, these lies that were spread by left opportunists in Palestine solidarity, what ended up happening, of course, Libya gets destroyed, the most prosperous state in Africa, a state that was trying to build a Pan-African currency to break away from Western dependency, gets utterly destroyed. You have slave markets now. Good news, though. I mean, Muammar Gaddafi's son, I think it was Saadi al-Gaddafi. He actually got released from prison recently, yeah. Right? So I'm hoping maybe he's somewhat like his father, and maybe he can do serious things there, because boy, does Libya ever need that after how badly the West screwed them over, quite frankly. But getting back to the point, of course, with Syria, of course, that was really used to provide left cover, right, for the dirty war on Syria. And that's been a really destructive kind of thing. And now you have a third of Syria occupied by really US-backed forces. It's been an utter disaster, basically. And the killer thing, of course, and this is funny because I gotta be honest, I'm not a big fan of anarchists for good reasons, other than those that maybe actually do take decent foreign policy positions, is of course that this Kurdish group, right? The group that occupies it is called the Syrian Democratic Force, but it's a Kurdish anarchist group occupying Syrian territory through the support of the US military. Really great anarchists, eh? But then again, I mean, they're kind of doing what I think what anarchists would do if they ever really had chances of power. But at the same time, I'm not going to go on anarchists too much more because that's not the point of this. Point being, right? Getting back to things again. With Matthew Green and Ziza Kanji, it kind of begins with Ziza Kanji, actually. So essentially, Kanji, she's I'm pretty sure she's the executive director of cultural programming at the Newark Cultural Center, right? And so why she's very interesting, in fact, is actually because, first of all, of course, she's a silver spoon person. Her parents were wealthy millionaires, and so she never really had to have a day of struggle in her life. But also, quite frankly, Kanji is one of these left opportunists, right? And so what she did, right, is she's pretty well known in terms of Kashmir and Palestine's solidarity, right?
Yeah.
but she's one of these problematic left anti-communists or social democrats. And so in how she does that, right, is with, yet again, this is why I brought up the example, first of all, is what she does is she weaponizes the legitimate oppression, right? The oppression of Palestinians, which is a legitimate thing that exists and does happen. And she equates it with a supposed debunked narrative of genocide, supposed genocide against Uyghur Muslims in China. And so it's incredibly problematic, right? And the fact that she has a platform is kind of nuts for me, really. Like, she's a columnist with this social democratic outlet, supposedly anti-imperialist or anti-war. And the kicker for it with it, the breach, right? And the kicker with it for her is that she actually pretty much openly collaborated with the Canadian state, this became parliamentary committee. And what she did, right, she was a key witness in this Xinjiang genocide vote committee, which I think we've probably talked about before in one or two of our last chats. And so she, of course, she's also a supporter of the Uyghur Rights Advocacy Project, which is an openly NED funded organization. And that organization admits that it only came to be because of NED funding. So basically, straight up, if you support NED groups and you claim to be on the left, you're, first of all, not on the left, and you're an opportunist who should not be trusted by almost anyone on the left, quite frankly. But the reason why I mentioned Kanji, of course, is in September 2020, right? This is an event called Canada's Silence on India's Colonization of Kashmir. It's hosted by Canadian Foreign Policy Institute and Just Peace advocates. And so, of course, they did not intend to have this event touch on Uyghurs or that situation at all, right? They're focused on Kashmir. Kashmir solidarity is where they're focused on.
I actually watched that event. I actually attended that event via Zoom,
And so that's the thing is it goes relatively normal until a Q&A session. Then all of a sudden, Kanji just randomly changes topics, quote unquote, calling out Canadian political elites for supposedly not doing enough about a supposed genocide that's happening in Xinjiang. And getting to the overall point is that it's yet again, it's this wrapping up of legitimate oppression with essentially made up nonsense. And it's incredibly dangerous because if people believe in you and people see you fighting for that one good cause, they're going to think if you wrap that cause up in similar banners and decorations, to put it, I guess, in a very blunt way, some people are going to get tricked, right? There's a vulnerability and a manipulability. There's very much the Western left is kind of in a bit of a weak state in the sense that it's very easy to be manipulated, right? Because I mean, like, I'll give you an example with Afghanistan, the Taliban. And by the way, I always say this before I start: no fan of the Taliban. They're not good. They were funded by the West to overthrow a socialist government, right? No fans of them. But the key is, like, you have people like Palestine Solidarity people and other people just being whipped up to be just to totally be down for crushing Afghanistan's Afghanistan's sovereignty right away. Like, I don't see really many people in these kind of like individualized solidarity communities really challenging the fact that the US has effectively looted Afghanistan's treasury for $9.5 billion, right? And that's another example of how easily there's just such a manipulatability, right, of the left. And this is why I hit on this issue, and I wrote it because I think we're still at a stage on the left at this point that it needs to be called out for people to see it for what it is. I think some people can see, but I don't think a majority of the people can see that right away. And so that Q&A session, I got to be honest, was remarkably awful, because it wasn't just Kanji. The other ones too were somebody was claiming that one of the panelists was claiming that China and India were teaming up to oppress Kashmiris, which is just total nonsense. It's just, there's totally nonsensical crap that was being said in there. And yet again, it was nothing to do with the event topic, basically, at all, right? And you have these just left opportunists just running around as free as you like. And it's incredibly frustrating, because here's the thing: when Kanji does this, she actually provides almost a bit of a template for a Canadian version of this tactic that, of course, was originally informed and created really in America, right? So where Green kind of starts this narrative is,
and Matthew Green's Matthew Green, for people who don't know, is an NZP, NZP
member of Parliament,
member of Parliament.
And so here's the deal basically with him is, so you obviously have this report by the parliamentary subcommittee, and so they're just going and supposedly claiming genocide. They, of course, all I'm says is yet again, they did not invite the gray zone, anyone from the gray zone, anyone from Minpress, anyone who dared to actually challenge what was going on. This was really just like a show trial. Essentially, it was like a farcical show trial style committee, and so you had like Adrian Zenz testifying. Of course, you had the Uyghur Rights Advocacy Project, and I'll hit on this one more time, right? The Uyghur Rights Advocacy Project, its executive director, Mehmet Toti, of course, remember, they're funded by the NED. So that organization was one of the leading ones, and the only one I could find that was talking about this Uyghur Parliamentary Uyghur Friendship Group, right? And that's, so here's the deal, right? 5 out of 8 of the parliamentarians that are on this subcommittee joined that parliamentary friendship group of the same person that was a key witness, and nobody ever declared that. Nobody ever talked about that. Nobody ever even said there was a conflict of interest potentially, because I'm sorry, how are you a proper judge of these things, especially if you're claiming a genocide with basically everything's been debunked, all these claims? How do you claim to be supposedly neutral or a proper judge of that when you're joining a friendship group funded by the friendship group? Not literally funded, but the fact is that the group that really seemingly initiated this is funded by the NED. How are you some sort of legitimate critic of this, right? I give this background because Green, of course, Green knew, and everyone knew full well, that there was a genocide, there's a vote coming up in the Canadian Parliament pushed by the Conservatives. I believe it was Bill C-56. And so what you have is Green 4 days earlier, essentially, he plays this card, and this card is just incredibly problematic because it's very similar to the line that that Kanji actually does, in fact. And what Green does is he, on February 18th during parliamentary debate, he suggests that the Canadian Conservative Party should condemn a supposed Uyghur genocide, which is actually a de-radicalization program, of course, with quote unquote, with the same energy as the real genocide of Palestinians by the Israeli apartheid state. And so effectively falsely equivocating Palestinian suffering to treatments of Uyghurs in Xinjiang, and really playing into this xenophobic discourse that just ultimately heightens tensions with China. And so he goes on February 22nd, and along with all NDP MPs present in the House of Commons, because I know 2 abstained, and I think those were Nikki Ashton and Don Davies. So he voted in favor, along with all those other MPs, Green, to declare a quote unquote Uyghur genocide. Then Green goes about 2 days later and falsely accuses China of being an imperialist nation, which is, look, it's been so thoroughly debunked at this point, whether it's the false claims of debt trap, that's been debunked, even by the bloody Atlantic. Even the Atlantic has debunked it. You know it's bad for you as a Western lapdog media person when the Atlantic is debunking your farcical claims. And of course, Green has been just pretty active in pushing this since. And he's certainly not, this isn't like a one-time meltdown. He's kept on doing this. And so Green then kind of goes quiet for a while, because I do actually think that committee vote article might have actually forced him to pipe down a bit. But seemingly he decided to be a little bit more quiet about it this time. And so what happened, right, is there's this July 29th Palestinian Solidarity event hosted by the Coalition of Canadian Palestinian Organizations. So it's a couple months after this genocide vote. And so what happens is, yet again, it's an event, get this, really to push against the farcical treatment of the Israeli apartheid state towards the Palestinians. So Green follows in Kanji's footsteps, falsely using the occasion to yet again falsely lumped together actually existing Israeli apartheid and genocide uh, with the treatment of China's Uyghur population in Xinjiang. And so what Green argued, and I'm going to quote here, Green argued that, quote, "We had no problem in the House of Commons calling that, bracket, China's treatment of Uyghur Muslims for what it was, a genocide." And end of quote. And so what Green's point was, right, was that he was trying to make this argument that as Canada has flagged supposed genocide to push for a cancellation of the Olympic Games in Beijing, in China, of course, 2022 Winter Olympics, it should also modify the Canada-Israel Free Trade Agreement to ensure Israel upholds international law. So it's a really, really cynical argument. It's based on a false premise. It's based on information from CIA cutouts and emphasizes strongly fanatical religious fundamentalists like Adrian Zenz. This guy's an absolute nutcase. And here's the kicker, right? If you look at what Green said in terms of modifying the agreement, you actually have even most of the Social Democrat NDP supporters calling for cancellation of SIFTA, of Canada-Israel Free Trade Agreement, of course, in recognition of the genocide against Palestinians. And yet you have this supposed lover of Palestine saying, oh, we should just do moderate. We should, we should just slightly modify it so they uphold international law. We know they're not going to uphold international law. Look, if you believe that you're either born yesterday or you're a cynical opportunist. And in this Green's case, he is a cynical opportunist. And he's one of the, in my view, he's probably, in the view of Daniel Z as well, who's associate editor at Canada Files, we both mutually agree he's probably the most dangerous social democratic figure in the country because he's managed to gain a following as some sort of left hero. But in fact, what Green does, what Kanji does, what they both do at the end of the day is they really go and they take legitimate causes in the case of Palestinian Kashmiri oppression, and they conflate it with Israeli apartheid against Palestinians. And it's incredibly cynical, of course, but I mean, it's not exactly beyond the realm of social democrats. Really, of course, you look long ago, Karl Kautsky, of course, supporting Germany's push for war during World War I, while actual leftists, communists, like the Bolshevik Vladimir Lenin, of course, condemned this unnecessary war. You have, quite frankly, the CCF, which later became obviously the current NDP. It was weak on international solidarity. It supported the West during the Cold War against the USSR. It supported Canada's entry into the imperialist Korean War. It supported the creation of NATO. It supported the NATO bombing of Yugoslavia. It supported the invasion of Afghanistan. It supported the destruction of Libya. And it's just continuing to this day. These social democrats have always basically provided left cover for imperialism. And so they're just an incredibly dangerous political force because you have, it's interesting because, and this is the note I want to emphasize, like Green, of course, is, in a sense, he's not like the NDP elite per se or whatever. He certainly isn't, because the NDP is such a cucked, essentially, party, quite frankly, that it gets terrorized when people even mention Palestine solidarity. You had this NDP candidate, Hal Berman, have like a meltdown a few months ago against I think it was Dirka Prout, a fellow NDP candidate, getting mad about the fact that she recognized the Nakba and talking. He tried to say that it was offensive to Jewish Canadians, which is just what? Like, that's the kind of people that the NDP encourage, right? Those are the kind of people the NDP really want. Like someone like Berman, someone like Randall Garrison, someone like Jagmeet Singh. Those are the people that are really representative of the party elite per se. But what Green does and why he's so dangerous is because he's very openly perceived as a maverick per se. People think he's a maverick, but what he does that is incredibly dangerous is that he will push certain lines for Palestine right hard, but then he will push twice as hard on these Uyghur genocide narratives and all this imperial crap. And then it's very credible to a lot of people that don't know better geopolitically. And so as a result, you manipulate people that might have basically stood against this and think, oh, hey, this great, quote unquote, great MP is doing all this great work and he says there's a genocide here. We should listen to him and support that uncritically. And that's a reality. That's a thing that happens. And so that's why it's so incredibly incredibly toxic, right? And that's the thing, is that at its very core, the NDP very much serves its function, right, as the left arm of capital, and really the left enabler of the Cold War on China. Look, to me, it's pretty clear that the only political entity and political party in Canada that's actually serious about combating the Cold War on China is the Communist Party of Canada. Like, I'm not a member of them, but they are the only one that are actually serious about challenging this. That's the truth of the matter, right? And certainly, I always say that people certainly not ever that party, the party's not for everyone, but even just it's better to get involved in social movements than waste your time in social democratic parties. You're just not going to get things done. You have Palestine Solidarity people going whooping and wooing all about how fantastic and great it is that you got a couple votes passed in an NDP convention that are just going to get ignored by the party. Or with the Green Party, where Annamie Paul is ignoring multiple pro-BDS resolutions and being very stoutly pro-Israel. So each time people just waste their efforts in social democratic parties, and these social democratic parties really function, of course, in a manner so forth to enable imperialism, right? And that's the very core of it. And that's the problem. And part of the reason why I was so firm on wanting to really go after this insidious tactic is, it's a funny way, is really for me, is that if we don't do something about it, right, there's this famous phrase of Karl Marx that's going to remain as true as ever then. History repeats itself first as tragedy, then as farce. And look, I don't want that to happen, because the history that happened first as tragedy, that was in America. And if it happens in Canada, that's the farce, because we knew about it, we could see it, and we needed to do something about it, right? And that's why this article, that's why I stuck my head out. That's why the CanFL stuck its neck out and did this. Because quite frankly, if the CanFL didn't do it, nobody else in the country is doing it.
A lot to unpack there, and I just want to say, if anyone is a social democrat who's also anti-imperialist and wants to respond,
I want to say one quick thing. Of course, there is a faction of social democrats that are anti-imperialists, right? Exactly. They do genuinely care about it. I just think they're wasting their time in the party, of course. But I think there is a genuine faction that care. In case that was unclear, I do not think all social democrats are imperialists. It's just their leaders, of course, always tend to be, yes. So thanks for the opportunity to clarify. Yeah.
Again, a lot to unpack there. And I guess I guess, I guess the question I wanted to ask, there's two questions, but the first one that comes to mind is this. Now, how is it though that that somebody like Matthew Green, Nikki Ashton, who did support twice the NATO bombing of Libya, and that was that was a war for oil and so forth. That was Iraq all over again. That was Afghanistan in the 1970s all over again, overthrowing a secular government, and we know all the evils that that come after that. So the first question. So my first question is, how is it that somebody like Matthew Green or somebody like Nikki Ashton and others who are sincerely social democratic on the economic front in Canada, and they stick their neck out to support Palestinians, which that is a stance that can get you smeared ruthlessly, unemployed, lose your job, all that stuff. But so how is it that they can be so great on Palestine, but then on Libya or Syria or the new Cold War on Russia and and Ukraine? How is it that they could have these imperial blind spots, basically?
I mean, that's social democracy's core function inherently, right? It is to be the blind spot of the left. That is, it's not an accident. That is its function, right? And so it's interesting with someone like Nikki Ashton. She genuinely does seem to have learned her lesson. Okay, that's the interesting thing. Is someone like her, she seemingly has learned her lesson, right?
And I think she's also been great.
Very good. She's been good on the Hmong issue.
Venezuela,
She's been good on that. Oh yeah, Venezuela. She's been solid. She's been good on the Hmong on the issue of Meng Wanzhou.
Yeah.
So she's one of the few. Her and Lascaris are two of the few kind of social democrats slash light socialists or kind of sort of socialists ish that I can respect. I mean, I would say mostly social democrat in Ashton's case and socialist in Lascaris's case. He's certainly an interesting one. It's hard to 100% pin him on a board per se, but he's definitely not a left anti-communist either. So he's definitely one of the better ones that I at least do have some respect for, which is a rarity these days. And so, yeah, no, it's a whole interesting scenario. You wanted to jump in though?
Well, I mean, it sort of goes like this. I mean, because this kind of leads to my second question, which is, and you don't have to answer it fully because because that would lead us into a very broad, conversation, which is how is it that we went from once upon a time massive protests against World War I, massive protests against the Vietnam War, and many of those people that were involved in the anti-Vietnam War movement were anti-communist left. So once upon a time, there was people protesting against the Vietnam War. How did we go from that to people who genuinely, I think, even want a confrontation with China, despite, So answer that.
Can you go to like the last 15 seconds of that? It was a little hard to understand what you're getting at.
So. Well, again, like, how is it that? So how is it that that you have these left politicians, these left-leaning politicians who can stick their neck out for Palestine, but then be completely blind in supporting Western imperialism in Syria and Libya? And then how did we go from once upon a time, we had an anti-war movement against World War I. We had an anti-war movement against the Vietnam War, which involved many anti-communist lefts. How did we go from that to now people supporting new Cold Wars with China?
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, it's an interesting sense, right? And I think it's one of the key things to consider, of course, is just the fact that I almost put it in the way there's certain easy causes, right? That in a sense, the imperial core, like political elites, media elites, will attack you for they'll tolerate it in a certain way, right? There's a certain level of toleration. There's a certain level of space given for it. But then when you have issues, when you have the Cold War on China, it's vicious. There's a difference in a level of attacks, to a certain degree, political intimidation, the nastiness from inside political parties. There's a whole different level, right? How do I put it this way? To support the Palestinian cause, for sure, it takes some principle. But it's easier to support that cause because the Western left likes to support victims more than it likes to support peoples with a legitimate chance of sovereignty at the end of the day. If Palestinians
Interesting, yeah.
Like if Palestinians were armed in a genuine fight, I wonder if a certain faction would join a third campus position. That's how little faith I have in a lot of these factions of the Western left. Quite frankly, that's the key thing. Is the Western left loves victims, and it doesn't really love nations and peoples that can stand up for themselves and resist oppression. Like if Syria, for example, was under full terrorist control, you better believe basically people would love Assad and love all these people if they were fighting just against the terrorists. But because they haven't been defeated, everyone hates them. It's like, for example, Libya. Everyone's like, maybe we made a mistake with Gaddafi. Look at how prosperous they are. Because you bombed the shit out of them, you let terrorists overrun the country, and there's slave markets because it's done, because you let them fail. That's why you care about them. Everyone, all these imperial leftists or these people that claim to be leftists only care about the workers' revolutions and all that crap. that just isn't reality, or just supports all these dissident groups, supports the countries being destroyed, and asks, oh, how could this happen? It's you know what's happening. You know what's happening full well, and you just don't do anything about it because you're opportunists. That's the thing. At the end of the day, there's still a massive problem in Canada with left opportunism.
So that's interesting, Aidan, because I recently co-hosted an event and the title of that event, which I did with World Beyond War, was "Ends the Western Gulf War on Syria." So that being said, because you mentioned that that Westerners maybe not probably
not all, right? I'm not limiting every single one, right? There's a large enough faction that is very problematic.
Yeah, exactly. Because I've asked this question many times to people who are involved in the anti-war front on Syria, and I believe I once asked Rick Sterling, like, what does it have to take for people to be opposed to the imperial project in Syria? Like, does Syria literally have to be like Yemen, like completely devastated and and demolished, and people starving to death, for people to be opposed to what is really the exact same war, except Syria is defending themselves, and except Syria has managed to defend themselves with the help of Russia? Or
yeah, and that's the thing, right? You look at the Palestinian cause, for example. Like, realistically, if you don't support Iran and Syria against imperial aggression, then in my view, you're not really giving enough. Then you're not giving the most serious support that you possibly can to Palestine solidarity. Because if you don't support the nations and the forces and then the militant forces that are actually doing the most to actively resist this and to support it, and support Russia in its efforts to defend Syria against terrorists, basically, quite frankly, Western-backed terrorists, then look, you're not doing the utmost that you can for Palestine solidarity. Of course, Russia, there are imperfections, of course. It's not, of course, like the USSR back in the day, but it is a state that very much is pushing for a multipolar world, right? And that's the most important thing at the end of the day, especially for the West, is that we can't per se dictate the actions that the peoples of these countries take, but at least we can support the efforts for a multipolar world and just not dictate the political systems, because we've done that before in the West, like the US for sure, in basically helping rig, of course, the election against the Communist Party in '96 to get Yeltsin elected for a second time, right? Yeah. So we've interfered enough in these regions of the world. We need to show international solidarity, but also we need to end this militarism, get the hell out. And also, to be honest, we're probably going to have to provide reparations, provide a lot of aid and support to these countries without conditions, because the amount of harm that we've done, we don't have a right to dictate what they do with it per se, right? It's just, there's such a nuts dichotomy where people just have just ludicrous ideas about how things are going forward, but it's just and also I also have to mention this about Putin's Putin's Russia, and of course I would never vote for Putin. I don't like Putin. He is very much a rival oligarch, queer-phobic, okay, all that stuff. But the reason why Putin is so Putin inherited that power that people claim, oh my gosh, he's a dictator, from Yeltsin, who was backed by the West. So if people want to complain about corruption in Russia and there's all of these oligarchs and rival oligarchs, well, again, the West was the one that created the mess they're in, and the West only dislikes Putin now because Putin's saying, dude, this is my country, and let me and like our people run our country the way we want it, and please bugger off. And of course, he has stuck his neck out for Syria and has spoken out, Libya and all that, right? Oh yeah, no, for sure. So definitely, I probably have about 5 more minutes at this point, then I probably need to be ready to head on out. So I just want to really kind of remind people, of course, with CanFLs, of course. Yeah, and we really do the socialist investigative journalism of Canadian foreign policy that nobody else in this country does on an institutional level. That is the absolute truth of the matter. Whether it's breaking the story on, and obviously you'll be talking to Daniel about this soon, about how the two Michaels are spies, whether it's talking about the Palestine solidarity attempts to manipulate it by opportunist social democrats, whether it's talking about Canada's really crucial role in the violence, neoliberal violence against protesters in Colombia. That's just what we've done in like 8, 9, 10 days, right? So we've done the work, right? And we've made these efforts and we'll continue to do the work. But at its core, what we need is the support of people. So we're currently at around $800 Canadian a month, right? And so we added a little bit of a special incentive at the $12.50 Canadian a month level, where we're going to introduce this a hashtag upon further investigation initiative, where what we're going to do is for some of these big investigations, we're going to add a special Twitter thread, a special Facebook post, and a special Instagram post, a follow-up one, really going in depth on what we couldn't fit in the article for length. And also we're going to do, when it makes sense, we're going to do some additional research and dig into some of the angles that we didn't get a chance to hit on originally. So you're going to get even more content from these massive investigations, these exclusive breaking investigations that we do at that $12.50 level. And of course, I think people are well aware, of course, that at the 2,500 level, and that's a little bit of ways away, right? So that's why I mentioned the $12.50 one first, because that's a realistic target right now. At the 2,500 level, we're going to, Camp Files, it's going to be hosted by me, and we're going to start this weekly interview show with a guest where we discuss exclusively world events impacted by Canadian imperialism. So it doesn't need to be something strictly happening in Canada. It just needs to be impacted by Canadian imperialism. And so I think it's really important because that show is going to provide platform, right, to people maybe that are doing more independent kind of writing, or activists and people that maybe don't get that platform typically. Because that's what a lot of the work with Canada Files is, and if it can just achieve the modicum of stability. And that 2,500, 3,000 level is at least that's enough for the Canada Files and myself and Daniel Z to do the work part-time, because it isn't looking like we're going to hit that 7,500 goal, though we would love it if we could, right? So that's what people should aim for, but we're not 100% sure, right? But at least at that 2,500 level, we can do it part-time and we can offer people really good incentives. This is serious upgrades in quality, and this stuff is going to take time. But what Daniel, what we've always made clear, right? We're willing to put in the work to earn people's support. Do we think we've provided a justification for doing that support? Sure, but there's always more work to do. And so we're hoping that in light of that pitch, maybe you'd consider, people that are watching this, consider setting up a donation, right? And put in a good word to your friends. That's the key. Are you part of an organization? Are you part of an activist group? Do you have a lot of friends? Do you have friend circles? Tell everyone, your friends, your organizations, your families, tell them about it. Tell them, push it around, especially organizations. Ask your organizations if they're willing to say, go put out a good word in their newsletter, put a good word on their social media. Every single share is really, really important because we're fighting a very much of an uphill slog. It's not like The Breach where they fundraised, where you have Naomi Klein, who I kid you not was the Gloria Steinem chair in university, the Gloria Steinem journalism chair at Rutgers University. There we go, got it out. The journalism chair dedicated to a literal CIA agent, of course. You have Naomi Klein. You have David Suzuki. You have Avi Lewis, of course, who's a social democratic hack that unfortunately certain elements that a lot of people thought were better than it have supported someone like Avi Lewis. You have people like that, quite frankly, these left social democratic opportunists that are going about and supporting these outlets and going about and supporting these things because really inherently they maintain the status quo and they openly go and support the imperialist NDP. The Canada Files doesn't have that. We don't have some sort of big allies. We don't have the massive people trying to run around and push for us. We need grassroots, as you say, people power. People power is what's going to be taking us to stability. And people power from yourself, people power from organizations. That's going to be what takes the Canada Files places. So if people could really consider donating, it's donorbox.com/the-Canada-Files. that would be really terrific.
Aidan, do I have time to ask 3 quick questions, or do you have to rush off now?
I might have to rush on off. This obviously, as I told you earlier, is my second interview of the day, so I just got a busy night ahead of me. But it's always a pleasure. It's always a pleasure. And
exactly. Well, no problem, and we'll try to have you back on the program, because there's a lot that you said that I want to ask you about, and there's lots to unpack. But anywho.
Oh well, when the time comes, I'm always happy to answer your questions. So.
All right. Well, so we are joined on this edition of 1+1. Aidan could not have pitched it. Could not have pitched it better myself for why people should be donating generously to the Canada Files. But we are joined on this edition of 1+1, our All Things Canada edition, talking about those who are selectively anti-war, and we need a movement that is consistently anti-war, anti-imperialist. The planet depends on it, and a better world depends on it. Aidan, thank you so much for joining. Thank you so much for joining me. I look forward to having you back on in the future. Look forward to having your colleague come on Friday. And anything.
Yeah. Oh, and go people that are watching. Go check the Canada Files YouTube channel. That's becoming more active. We're sharing clips from any appearances that myself or Daniel make on news shows, and there's going to be something big coming up that I'm working out with a longtime friend of the Canada Files that. I'll give you a hint. You've interviewed them before, and I won't say more than that. So people should subscribe. They should watch some of the videos. They should look forward to what's coming. Big things are coming along, and I really hope people enjoy them.
I'll make sure to post all those links, and all those people that Aidan called out. You're free to contact me for a right of reply. Until then, Aidan, thank you so much. For
don't be waiting too long for that, Youri.
Aidan, thank you so much for joining me. Best of luck with the fundraising drive. I really hope that you make that goal, and if not, I know that whatever money that you made will be put into good use to strengthen.
Oh yeah, it'll be valuable regardless. So.
And the anti-imperialist movement. So thank you so much.
All right. Have a good one.